My name is Declan Stormblade, and I am charged with protecting Valorian. Join me on my quest as we read our audiobook series.
Good evening and welcome to Heroes of Valorian audiobook series. We got a good one tonight. We got a start of a new quest, the quest for light, okay? If you remember, Alindra was kidnapped, right? We got to figure out, who this person is that kidnapped her. They also took one of the magical artifacts, pretty crazy stuff. Two rules here at Heroes of Valorian. Rule number 1, get yourself a magical artifact. We made these. I have the flame core. What do you have, bud?
I had the tide stone.
The tide stone. All right, very cool. Rule number 2 is if you enjoy the story, please like and subscribe so you can know when we publish more of these, right? All right, very cool. So let's take one more look at that book cover, right? Pretty cool. The Wizard's Scroll is the name of this book, okay? And this is, again, in the first book in a series of books called The Quest for Light. We've got Declan and Pip and the pseudo-dragons. Got to get into this place. We think it's the Sublunar Realm, right? Pretty cool stuff. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Chapter 1, The Broken Mountain. The mountain was still. That was the wrong word for it, Declan thought. Still meant quiet. Still meant peaceful. What was left of Stonefang's fortress was neither of those things. It was simply over. Done. The great carved stone entrance had folded inward like a crushed tin cup, and dust still hung in the air, turning the late afternoon like a dull, gritty orange. Somewhere deep underneath all that rock, under thousands and thousands of tons of it, 2 dragons lay buried. Declan stood at the edge of the rubble and said nothing. Zephyr pressed against his left calf, Amber pressed against his right. Both pseudo-dragons were quiet in a way they almost never were, their usual chittering and wrestling completely absent. They could feel what he was feeling. That was the nature of the bond they shared. It was useful in a fight. Right now, it just meant they were all sad and together. "We won," Pip said from somewhere behind him. Declan didn't turn around. "I know. Stonefang is buried. Ashenclawed is buried. The fortress is gone. The golems are gone. Nobody else got hurt." Pip paused. "Those are good things." "I know they are." Another long pause, longer this time. "She's gone, Declan." "I know that too." He'd watched it all happen. They watched. Alindra charged the robed figure, that tall hooded shape with the glowing purple eyes and the hands covered in dark symbols. Because that's what Alindra did. She charged at things that needed charging at. She had told them both over and over across 2 years of quests and danger and close calls, some things were worth the risk. She admitted every single time she said it. The portal had opened like a wound in the air, a rip of purple-black energy, cold and wrong-smelling. The robed figure had stepped backward into it, and Alindra had gone through it, still holding the flame core, still refusing to let go of the artifact. And then the portal had simply closed. No sound, no flash of light, just gone. Declan had stood there for a full minute before he could move. "Hey!" Pip appeared at his shoulder, and the dark rogue was outfitted. His outfit was caked in dust, and there was a cut on his cheek he hadn't mentioned. He handed Declan a water skin. "Drink something. You've been standing there staring at a pile of rocks for 20 minutes. Declan drank. The water helped more than he had expected it to. "What do we do?" Pip asked. And his voice was quieter now, serious. Pip used that voice rarely enough that it always meant something when it appeared. "I don't know yet," Declan said honestly, "but we'll figure it out." Zephyr made a small sound and pushed her head harder against his leg, and Ember squeezed, which sent a small shower of sparks toward the rubble and accomplished nothing in particular. It was as good an answer as any. Chapter 2, The Hard Goodbye. Captain Mara found them as the sun began to set. She came over the ridge from the direction of the harbor, moving fast in the way she always did when something was wrong and she'd run out of patience waiting for it to become right. Torben was behind her and Kira behind him, and the rest of the crew behind them. A small river of worried people who had spent 2 days listening to the mountain fall apart and not knowing who was still alive. When Mara saw Declan and Pip standing at the rubble, she closed the distance between them in about 10 seconds and put a hand on each of their shoulders and looked them over from head to foot with the expression of someone checking a ship for damage after a storm. "Anyone hurt?" she asked. "Not badly," Declan said. "Pip has a cut on his face he won't acknowledge." "It's a scratch," Pip said. "It's quite deep for a scratch," Mara said, already pulling a bandage from the pouch she always carried. "Sit down." Pip sat. She worked quickly and efficiently the way she did everything. "Alindra?" Declan told her. He kept it short. The rogue figure, the portal, the flame core. Alindra gone through. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where did the portal go?" "Somewhere called the Sublunar Realm," Declan said. The rogue figure mentioned it once before. "The space between the stars. The place legends forgot. I don't know more than that." "I do," said a voice, and everyone turned. Torben had unrolled a piece of oilskin and was holding it out. A journal, dark covered, old. He looked slightly sheepish. Declan took it, opened it, and the first page carefully. The handwriting was cramped and precise, very, very old. Personal Journal of Lord Vale Morwick, Scholar of Dimensional Theory. "It's about portals," Declan said, scanning it quickly. "It's something called the Sublunar Realm." He looked up. This actually helps." "Good," Mara said, and she tied Pip's bandage with a firm knot and stood up. Her face gone to the expression Declan recognized, one she'd used when she was about to say something nobody wanted to hear. "Sit down, both of you." They sat flat on a piece of broken stone, and Zephyr climbed into Declan's lap, which was logistically difficult, given she was the size of a large cat, but he let her anyways. "I have to go back to Ashenmore." Pip opened his mouth. "Let me finish. I have to go back because the king needs to know Stonefang is defeated. That's the largest military threat that Valorian has faced in living memory, and the king has been waiting for news of it. The artifacts, the ones we have, need to go to the vault where they're safe, and Alindra's disappearance needs to be reported because she is the hero of Valorian and the king deserves to know." "But," Pip started. "I said let me finish, Pip." Her voice gentle, which was almost worse than stern. "I know what you're about to say. I know you want to leave now. I know every hour feels like a failure. But you don't have a destination and you don't have a plan. You don't have supplies beyond what we're carrying right now. And you've just spent 2 days fighting dragons in a collapsing mountain fortress." She looked between them. "You're not ready to chase someone into another dimension today." The silence that followed was uncomfortable enough to sit in. "She's right," Declan said at last. Pip looked at him and then back at Mara and then at the ground. "And I hate it when both of you are right at the same time." "There's a scholar," Declan said, pulling the journal back out. He'd been reading while Mara spoke, which she had noticed, but hadn't stopped because she knew him well enough to know that he couldn't help it. "Lord Morwick mentioned someone, a wizard, who studied the Sublunar Realm. He calls him Old Aldrich of the Hill Castle." He looked up. "Highstone Castle. It's on maps I've seen." "East of Shipwreck Cove in the Central Hills," Mara said immediately. She'd spent years learning every landmark on a Valorian map. 2 days' ride. "He might know how to find Alindra," Declan said, "or at least how to get where she is." Mara nodded slowly. "That's a plan." She reached into her coat and produced a purse. It clinked heavily. "Supplies. Enough to get you to Highstone and then some. Torben and Kira will stay with you until you're set, and then meet us back at the ship." Torben gave a solid nod. Kira from behind him looked like she was trying not to look upset, which meant she was pretty upset. "What about after?" Pip said. "After we find a way into this sublunar place, you won't be there?" Then we'll come find you. Mara said simply. You have a habit of getting into situations that require rescue by ship. I expect this'll be no different. She stood, brushing dust from her coat. You're not children anymore, the two of you. You know that, don't you? We know, Declan said. Good. Then you know you don't need me to hold your hand every step of the way. She looked at him steadily. What you do need is to stop standing still and start moving. Alindra would not want you moping at a pile of rubble. Pip stood abruptly. She absolutely would not, he agreed. She'd already been 10 miles down the road telling us to keep up. That landed right. Declan felt it in his chest. Something that ached, but also moved, like a gear catching after being stuck. We leave at first light, he said. The goodbye the next morning was brief in the way that goodbyes are when everyone is trying not to make it harder than it already is. Mara gripped both their shoulders at once, firmly, and said nothing. Kira gave them each a quick, unexpected hug that surprised everyone, including Kira. Torba had handed over a pack of supplies he'd clearly spent the night organizing with military precision, including, for reasons he did not explain, a full wheel of very good cheese. The cheese is important, he said when he looked at Pip. Pip looked at it. Oh, I'm not questioning the cheese, Pip said. The cheese is welcome. Then the crew was walking back toward the harbor, and Declan and Pip and their two pseudo-dragons were walking the other way. And that was that. Pip looked back. Declan didn't. Right, Pip said, falling into step beside him. Highstone Castle, wizard. Hopefully one who knows what a sublunar realm isn't going to turn us into frogs. Wizards don't actually turn people into frogs, Declan said. I feel like you don't know that for certain. Well, no, I don't know it for certain. Great, Pip said. Wonderful. Very reassuring. Zephyr, riding on Declan's shoulder, made a sound that might have been a laugh. Ember on his right was already asleep. Chapter 3. The Long Road. 2 days of walking. Not sailing, not riding, walking on their actual feet. Through actual countryside, over actual hills, along actual roads that had actual rocks in them that found their way into Pip's boots with what he described as supernatural accuracy. I've walked more the last 2 days than I have in the last 6 months, Pip announced on the afternoon of the second day, limping slightly up a long hill. We are sea adventurers. We go places on a ship. The ship does the walking. That is the entire point of a ship. Technically, the ship does sailing, not walking, Declan said. The ship does the moving. The moving is done by the ship. We stand on the ship while the moving happens. That is the correct arrangement. Pip shifted his pack. This arrangement, and he gestured broadly at the entire concept of landscape, is deeply incorrect. Declan said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly. The countryside between the western fortress and the central hills was actually quite beautiful. If you were the sort of person who could appreciate scenery while not worried about interdimensional kidnappers, rolling green land, stone walls dividing farm fields, distant waterfalls, catching the afternoon light, small villages they skirted around, not wanting to answer questions about where they'd come from or where the third member of their usual party had gone. Ember spent most of the journey airborne, doing looping swirls over the fields and returning periodically to report nothing interesting, with a small dismissive chirp. Zephyr stayed close to Declan, occasionally gliding ahead to scout and then circling back, her silvery blue scales catching the light. On the first day they camped by a stream. Declan cooked. Pip sat with the journal Torben had given them. The Sublunar Realm, he read, is not a place we understand. It does not exist in our sky, beneath our earth, or across our ocean. It exists between, in the spaces the mortal eye cannot perceive. Scholars have called it the inverse world, the dark mirror, the dreaming below. I call it simply a place that is wrong. He paused. So poetic, he added in his own voice. The place that is wrong, comforting. Very glad Lord Morwick wrote this down. Keep reading, Declan said. Those who have entered and returned, a very small number, report the realm appears as perpetual twilight. No sun, no true night. The sky is always the color of a bruise, and the stars move in patterns that match no constellation chart. Most strikingly, the geography is an inversion of our world. Where Valorian has mountains, the Sublunar Realm has valleys. Where we have valleys, there are mountains. Lakes and rivers do not exist as water, they exist as something else. I believe, though cannot prove, they exist as mist. Inverted geography, Declan said, turning that over. So if we know where we are when we go in, we can figure out where things are. In theory, if we can figure out the entry point, Pip flipped ahead several pages. There's more. Entry to the Sublunar Realm cannot be achieved through ordinary means. Portals between our world and it are rare, unstable, and almost always open from the other side. However, he sat up straighter, there is one known natural gateway. I have spent 17 years tracking accounts of it. It is at a place called the Dead Sands Oasis in the volcanic desert northwest of the Central Hills. The gateway is submerged, hidden by the oasis pool itself and invisible to ordinary light. It can only be perceived and activated by direct pure starlight. Moonlight is insufficient. No artificial light will serve. Only open starlight on a clear night. They looked at each other across the fire. Northwest of the Central Hills, Declan said. Which is where we're going. Yeah, which is where we're going, Declan confirmed. Pip closed the journal carefully and set it on his knee. You know what would have been really useful? If someone had found this journal before Alindra got kidnapped into another dimension. Well, we have it now. Oh, yeah, no, we have it now. I'm not complaining. It's simply noting the timing could have been better, and he poked the fire with a stick. How do you activate a gateway with starlight? You just stand there and wait for stars to fall on it? Declan said, I don't know. Maybe Aldrich will know. Aldrich the wizard, who may or may not turn us into frogs. He won't turn us into frogs. I feel like we had this conversation already. We have, Declan said. The conclusion was the same. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once and went quiet. Zephyr was curled on Declan's bedroll and already asleep. Ember was balanced improperly on a branch overhead, also asleep, her tail hanging down and occasionally dripping small embers that went out before they hit the ground. She's going to set fire to that tree, Pip observed. She hasn't yet. She absolutely will one day. Probably, Declan admitted. They sat there for a while, and then Pip pulled his bedroll closer to the fire and lay down. We'll get her back, he said to the sky, and Declan didn't answer, but he was pretty sure Pip hadn't actually been talking to him. Chapter 4, Highstone Castle. Highstone Castle sat in the Central Hills like something that had fallen from a very great height and simply decided to stay. It was tall, 5 towers, which was at least 2 towers more than any sensible castle needed. And it leaned, not dramatically and not in a way that suggested it was about to fall down, just slightly, in different directions, on different towers, as though over the centuries the whole structure had gradually lost interest in vertical. The stone was old, dark with age, streaked with green where moss had found purchase in every crack. Arched windows sat crooked in their frames, and ivy had colonized the east wall so thoroughly that the actual stone was invisible. It leans, Pip said. I see that. Is it supposed to lean? Probably not. Do we go in anyway? Yep. They walked up the hill toward it. The road became a path. A track became a series of flat stones that someone had arranged with the optimism of a person who had started a project and then lost enthusiasm partway through. A wooden gate stood open, because the hinges had rusted into a position that was functionally open had apparently been there for some time. Declan knocked on the main door, and a very long silence followed. He knocked again. Come in! The voice from inside was the voice of a man who was not coming. It was the voice of a man who was probably coming eventually, but first had to deal with something he considered more important. Various crashes and one very clear sound of something made of glass breaking accompanied this announcement. After another minute, the door opened. The wizard was tall, thin, wearing robes that once had been purple, but had since become the color of purple that has been washed many times and left to dry in inconsistent sunlight. He had white hair in every direction, an expression of someone who had been interrupted in the middle of a very interesting thought by something very uninteresting. It was only now discovering that the very interesting thing might actually be interesting after all. He looked at Declan, he looked at Pip, he looked at Zephyr and Ember, who landed on Declan's shoulders and were examining him with equal interest. "Pseudo-dragons," he said immediately. "Bonded pair, fire and frost. Remarkable. I've only read about that combination. The boy is the ranker," and he pointed at Declan without waiting for an answer. "Yes, obviously. Look how they're positioned, shoulder to shoulder, facing outward. Defensive but not hostile," and he stopped himself. "But you're not here about pseudo-dragons." "We're not here about pseudo-dragons," Declan confirmed. No, of course not." And the wizard opened the door wider. Come in. I'm Aldrich. You may have heard of me as Aldrich the Brilliant." "We actually hadn't heard of you at all," Pip said. Aldrich's expression flickered slightly. "Yes, well, some call me Aldrich the Dim, which is deeply unfair and the result of one minor incident involving a miscalculation about the weight-bearing capacity of a laboratory floor. There is neither here nor there," and he turned and walked into the castle. "Come in. Mind the, There was a crash behind them. "Stack of books." Aldrich finished. "Sorry, they're supposed to be shelved. Shelving is ongoing." The inside of Highstone Castle was organized in the way that a pile of autumn leaves is organized, technically all in one place, but not in any system that could be explained to someone else. Every surface had books on it. The books had other books on top of them, and in several cases the books had papers on top of them, and the papers had more books on top of the papers. And somewhere under all of that, there was presumably a table. Instruments of brass and glass and crystal covered every windowsill. Charts covered the walls, layer over each other so many times that the oldest ones were probably structural at this point. The air smelled of old paper and something faintly chemically, oddly, toast. Aldrich led them to a sitting room. It had 2 chairs and a small fire and noticeably fewer books than the rest of the castle. He gestured at the chairs and they sat, and he perched on a stool and looked at them with intense, slightly too close attention of a man who had spent too many years talking mainly to himself. "Now," he said, "what brings you two adventurers, rangers by the look of the bow, experience by the bearing, to my door? Something unusual, something I'll find interesting?" And he leaned forward. "Or you wouldn't be here otherwise." Declan put the journal on the table between them, and Aldrich's eyes went wide. He snatched it up, opened the first page, and made a sound that was difficult to describe. Something between delight and distress. "Morwick's journal," he breathed. "Vale Morwick. Where did you... No, later. You're here about the Sublunar Realm," and he looked up sharply. "Did someone go through?" "Our mentor," Declan said, taken through a portal by a figure in dark robes. Tall, purple eyes, hands covered in symbols. Took her and a magical artifact with him. "Describe the portal." "Purple-black, cold, open like a tear in the air." "Sublunar origin, definitely." Aldrich stood up abruptly and began moving through the room with the energy of someone who had been sitting still too long. "And you want to follow?" "We want to bring her back," Pip said. Yes, of course, it's the same thing from the other direction." Aldrich was pulling books from shelves, several at once, stacking them in his arms. "I've been studying the Sublunar Realm for 34 years. I've never actually been there, which is a great frustration of my life, since I know more about it than anyone alive, and have somehow never managed the actual part where you get to go. But I know the theory," and he dropped the books on the table. "The gateway. Did Morwick write about it? He must have." "The Dead Sands Oasis," Declan said, "northwest of here, activated by starlight." Aldrich pointed triumphantly. Correct, yes. The gateway is submerged in the actual pool. Visible only, direct starlight illuminates the water. The pool becomes translucent. You can see the other side. He was opening books quickly, flipping pages. I have an activation phrase. Yes, here. He pushed a book across to Declan. The page had a careful copy of old script. Declan read it twice. How do we get back? Pip asked. Ah, said Aldrich, when his enthusiasm dimmed slightly. That is the more complicated question. How complicated? Pip asked. Well, it's possible. It's certainly theoretically possible. You will need to use something like a flame core. We don't have the flame core, Declan said. That's with Alindra. That's where we're going. Yes, Aldrich said, down heavily. Yes, I thought of that when I said it. So your exit strategy depends on recovering the artifact from the person who took it. We'd presumed that already, Declan said. Pip raised his hand. I would like to register that I had not assumed that, and this is slightly more terrifying to hear out loud. The important thing, Declan said, is getting in. Once we're there and we have Alindra, we'll figure out the rest. Aldrich looked at him for a moment, and then he smiled, a genuine one, different from the frenetic energy of a few minutes ago. You know, most people who come here are asking about the Sublunar Realm are scholars, theorists, people who wanted to know. You actually intend to go. We do, Declan said. Remarkable. Aldrich stood again, and then I have things to give you. He disappeared into the chaos of the adjacent room and was gone long enough. Pip ate 3 biscuits from a plate set on a side table. Was on his 4th when Aldrich returned. He was carrying 2 things. One was a scroll, sealed with dark wax, covering careful handwriting. The other was a glass vial on a cord, stoppered tightly, containing water that was somehow luminous, not glowing exactly, but catching light in a way normal water didn't. The scroll of passage, Aldrich said, setting it down carefully. The activation phrase, the oasis coordinates, and everything I know about sublunar geography, which is substantial. Though I should warn you, it was compiled from second-hand accounts and therefore incomplete in places, and he set a vial beside it. And star water, collected from a glacier an altitude over a period of 40 years. The water has absorbed starlight from the Sublunar Realm. Where fire behaves strangely and light is dim, this will burn clear and bright. You have exactly 1 use. Thank you, Declan said. One more thing. Aldrich reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a small compass on a worn leather cord. It was old. Its case slightly battered, its needle deep blue. It was almost black, and he held it out. This was mine, he said. For a long time, it doesn't point north. He paused. It points towards the person you love most, the living person closest to your heart. And he looked at Declan directly. If the person you're looking for is alive, which I believe she is, based on what you've described, the figure's intentions, it will find her when you're in the same realm. Declan took it carefully. Keep the scroll dry, Aldrich said, returning to his normal brisk manner. The dead sands are volcanic. The desert is no joke, even for experienced travelers. Be cautious of... He stopped, looked at them both again, the worn gear, the easy competence, and the way they held themselves. The pseudo-dragons already settling in again now that the conversation was winding down. Actually, you probably don't need my advice. Pip put the 4th biscuit down and stood up. The biscuits were excellent. Aldrich blinked. Thank you. I made them myself. That is genuinely surprising, Pip said honestly. They left Highstone Castle in the late afternoon, the shadows long across the hills. Declan had the scroll tucked inside his jacket next to his skin, keeping it dry by instinct before he had even thought about it. Zephyr rode his shoulder, and Ember had appointed herself aerial scout again and was already a red shape against the sky ahead of them. Aldrich the Brilliant, Pip said thoughtfully as they walked. He's not wrong about knowing a lot. He is a bit wrong about the brilliant. He did give us everything we need. Pip considered that. True, he gets points for that. He adjusted his pack. Also, the biscuits. I'll give him the points for the biscuits. The biscuits were good, Declan agreed. Ahead of them, the land opened up, and the horizon showed the first faint, dark smear of dead sands in the distance. 2 days northwest, through dry scrubland and the desert itself. Declan looked at the compass on the cord. The needle had settled, pointed steadily northwest. He tucked it inside his shirt and kept walking. Chapter 5. Into the Dead Sands. The Dead Sands began without ceremony. There was no dramatic border, no wall of sand, no sign announcing that the pleasant green scrubland was ending, and something considerably less pleasant was beginning. The grass simply became sparse, and then sparser, and then not grass, but dry pale weeds, and then not weeds, but grit, and then not grit, but the black volcanic sand of the Dead Sands proper. And they were in it before they properly noticed the transition. It looked like nothing so much as the inside of a cold forge. The sand was dark, not white or golden, but the gray-black ash of charcoal, fine-grained and dense, shifting with soft hissing sound underfoot. In the distance, the shapes of old volcanic vents broke the flat horizon, their sides striped white with mineral deposits. The air tasted like sulfur. Well, Pip said, looking at all of this, it's pretty bleak. Mount Thundercloud is northwest of here, Declan said. This whole desert is what was left behind. Centuries of ash and volcanic matter. Oh, interesting, but also bleak. Pip took a step, and his boot sank slightly into the fight sand. Great, this is going to be magnificent for the feet. Zephyr unexpectedly seemed almost comfortable. She had always been at her best in cold, and the desert nights, Declan had read, dropped fast and sharp when there was nothing to hold the heat in. She sat on his shoulder and looked around at the stark landscape with what might have been approval. Ember, conversely, was doing tremendous. The volcanic sand was warm even now in the late afternoon, and she kept dropping down from her flight to roll in it enthusiastically before launching herself back up. She clearly considered this an excellent development. At least someone's happy, Pip muttered. They made good time that first afternoon. The sand slowed them, but not badly, and the path through the desert, through to the desert oasis, was in the scroll, marked in Aldrich's careful handwriting. Northwest, always northwest, aiming for a specific cluster of volcanic formations that would tell them they were close. They made camp when the light faded, which happened faster than expected. There was no real twilight in the Dead Sands. The sky went from orange to dark in minutes, as if impatient with the whole process. Declan lit a fire using the minimal scrub brush they carried in, knowing wood would be scarce here. The temperature had already dropped 15 degrees. Right, Pip said, wrapping himself in his cloak. The cold in a hot desert. That makes perfect sense. Ember immediately migrated to sit pressed against Pip's left side. He looked down at her. I see what you're doing here, he said. You're using me for warmth. Ember blinked up at him. We both know you generate heat. You're using me. Ember made a small sound and looked away with the energy of a creature who had been falsely accused and was too dignified to argue. I'm on to you, Pip told her, and then he put his arm around her because she was, in fairness, quite warm. Don't tell anyone. Declan read from Warwick's journal while Pip slept, because sleep wasn't coming easily, and reading at least felt like he was doing something. The entries about the Sublunar Realm were detailed in the way that an obsessive scholar's notes are detailed. Every account cataloged, cross-referenced, annotated, and cramped margins. Other scholars' descriptions copied out in full. Theories marked with question marks, corrections, added in different ink, wherever later evidence had changed his mind. What emerged from all of it was a picture of a place that was genuinely alien, not just different, alien. The physics were wrong in small, consistent ways. Fire burned dimmer. Sounds traveled oddly. The sense of direction was unreliable. Multiple travels reported. Sounds traveled oddly. The sense of direction was unreliable. Multiple travels reported being watched. Though there was nothing ever seen watching them. The mist lakes, the great low-lying cloudscapes that filled the places where Valorian's mountains would be, were navigable but disorienting, because the mist absorbed light and made distance impossible to judge. He read until his eyes were tired, and then he laid down and stared at the stars. The compass on the cord was warm on his chest, and he didn't check which direction it was pointing. He didn't need to know. Well, in fact, he already knew. Chapter 6. The Storm in the Sand. The sandstorm hit on the second morning, when they were 3 hours into the day's march and feeling good about their pace. It came from the northwest, the direction they needed to go, which Pip noted was either cosmic irony or the desert taking things personally. 1 minute, the horizon was clear, and in the next, there was a wall of dark volcanic grit moving toward them with the speed of purpose and something that had somewhere else to be. "Run?" Pip suggested. "No point," Declan said. He was already pulling his scarf up over his face. "We can't outrun it. We need to navigate through it." "Navigate through a wall of sand?" "Yes." "By which you mean—" "Get your scarf up." The storm hit like a fist. Not violent enough to knock them down, but close. The air went immediately dark. The kind of dark that was full rather than empty, full of grit and noise and a hissing that was somehow both quiet and overwhelming. Visibility dropped to about 10 feet, then 5, then the distance between Declan's outstretched hand and his face. Zephyr buried himself inside his jacket pocket and stayed there, Ember tucked under his arm. He could feel Pip's hand grip the back of his pack. "Don't let go," Declan said, loudly enough to carry through the sound. "Not planning to," Pip called back. "Are we just walking in a direction and hoping?" "No," Declan said. Declan closed his eyes. He couldn't see anyways. Closing them let the focus on what he was actually trying to do. The tidestone sat at his hip in his leather case. He'd been using it for months, learning its capabilities the way you learn language. Slowly at first, and then faster as patterns became familiar. He had used it to control rivers and create water barriers, pull rain from dry air. He had used it to flood an underground chamber and to sense underground passages. He had never tried this exactly, but Morwick's journal had mentioned it. Dead sand set over a deep underground river, fed by snowmelt from the mountains far to the north. Too deep to reach, but there. He reached for it. The tidestone hummed against his hip. He pushed his sense of it outward and down, through the volcanic sound and the dense rock beneath the ancient compressed layers. Below that, there, a thread of moving water, faint as a whisper, running northwest to southeast, running in the direction they needed to go. "I have it," he said. "Have what?" "The direction. Follow me exactly." And he took a step, letting the water guide him northwest. The river was pulling him slightly left, correcting him when he drifted. "Stay close." "I'm not going anywhere," Pip said, from somewhere just behind his shoulder. "Literally, I can't see anything. One time I thought I saw a shape, and it was my own hand." They walked. Declan kept his focus split, his feet on the ground, his mind on the water below, making tiny adjustments. The storm roared. The grit stung every exposed bit of skin. His eyes were squeezed shut, so tight that they ached. Twice he felt Pip's grip on the back of his pack tighten suddenly. Once, when a particular strong gust nearly knocked them sideways. Once, when something large moved past them in the dark, which they both decided not to think about. Then, after what felt like an hour, but was probably less, the roaring diminished. The grit thinned. He opened his eyes to find the storm behind them. They had walked through it. They stood in the aftermath, gust with volcanic sand in their hair and clothing, and impressively, Pip appeared to have it in his ears. Zephyr emerged from his jacket and shook herself like a wet dog. Ember, who had simply closed both eyes and waited under Declan's arms, hopped back to his shoulder and started preening. Pip spat sand. "I have opinions about this desert," he announced. "We're through it," Declan said. "We are through it." Pip looked back at the storm, which continued cheerfully without them. "How did you know which way to go?" "Underground river. I followed it with a tidestone." Pip looked at him. You navigated a sandstorm using a magic water stone to find an underground river. Yep. Declan, Pip said seriously. That was extremely cool. We should keep moving. In a moment, I just want to acknowledge that you navigated a sandstorm using a magic water stone to find an underground river. That's something people should know about. Well, nobody's here. I'll tell people later. I'm going to tell that story for years. They walked on. The dead sands continued to be exactly what they were: dark, sparse, sulphurous, and hot in the day and cold at night. But they moved steadily northwest, and the compass under Declan's shirt continued to point the same direction they were walking, which felt, if not like comfort, at least like confirmation. Chapter 7. Dune Wraiths. On the third night in the Dead Sands, they found out they were not alone. They had made camp at the base of one of the old volcanic formations, a useful windbreak, solid stone at their backs, good sight lines in every direction. Declan had taken first watch. He was sitting with a small fire at his back, watching the dark when Zephyr went rigid on his shoulder. He went still immediately. She was an excellent early warning system, better than any tool he'd owned. The dark was moving, not dramatically. It wasn't a creature charging or a sound in the bushes. It was more subtle than that, a shifting, a slight wrongness to the way the dark fell in certain patches, as if pieces of darkness were slightly less dark than the rest of the darkness, and those slightly less dark pieces were slowly rearranging themselves. "Pip," he said quietly, "up." Pip was awake immediately. That was one of the things Declan had always admired about him. No groggy transition, just asleep and then not asleep. He sat up with both hands near his daggers. "What is it?" "Something in the dark." Pip looked. The shapes were more obvious now, 3 of them, maybe 4. Roughly human height, but not quite human shaped. They moved without sound. Their feet, if they had feet, did not displace the sand. "That," Pip said quietly, "is extremely not good." Ember made a sound deep in her chest and gathered herself to breathe fire. Declan put a hand on her back, not stopping her, just waiting. The shapes came closer, stopped, and were still. Declan reached up and touched the star-weaved crown where it sat at his temple. He rarely wore it all day. It was tiring having truth sight running constantly, but he kept it close. Now he pressed it firmly and let it work. The shapes clarified. They were made of sand. Not sand thrown into a vaguely human shape, more like sand that had developed intuition. The fine volcanic grit of the dead sands animated and cohering, holding a form because it wanted to hold that form. Their faces, if you could call them faces, were suggestions rather than features. A slight darkening where eyes might be, a denser gathering where a mouth might be, ancient, patient, watching, not hostile. Declan let out a slow breath. "They're not attacking." "They're also not leaving," Pip pointed out. "No." The crown's clarity, he could see something else. The wraiths were oriented not just toward them, but past them, beyond the camp, northwest. They kept looking from Declan to Pip to something beyond them, and back again, with the persistent energy of something trying to communicate. "They're warning us," Declan said, slowly. "About what?" Declan looked northwest, past the camp, past the edge of the firelight, into the dark beyond. Nothing visible. But the wraiths kept looking that way and then back at him, and their movements had an urgency that was building. "Something in that direction," he stood up carefully. "Something we shouldn't walk into." "Well, how do we know what it is if they can't talk?" "They can gesture," and he looked at the nearest wraith. "Show us," he said, feeling slightly foolish saying it, but saying it anyways. "What is out there?" The wraith shifted and it moved, not toward him but sideways, pulling his eye northwest, and then he could have sworn it dipped slightly, its form collapsing downward as if sinking into the ground. "Ground," Pip tried. "A hole, something underground." The wraith repeated the gesture. "Sinkhole," Declan said, and it clicked. "There are sinkholes ahead in the sand." Pip looked at him, and then the wraith, and then back at Declan. "You got all that from a sand blob collapsing." "That's what they're saying." "You understand sand blobs." "I understand warnings." Declan turned to the wraith. "We'll go around, east, to avoid it." The wraith was still for a moment. Then it shifted slowly, not blocking their path east, but moving aside. I'll take that as a yes, Declan said. Pip stared at the wraiths for another few seconds. I have questions, he said, about why the desert has its own warning system and who installed it, and whether it comes with a manual. But I'm going to ask them when they're not standing right in front of us sand ghosts in the dark. Good plan. They broke camp at dawn and went east for a half day before curving northwest again. The ground they bypassed, when they looked at it, had the slightly too smooth surface of sand that covered something hollow beneath. In places it had collapsed already, leaving dark, circular holes that dropped into nothing. Pip looked at these holes for a long while. I'm glad about the sand blobs, he said. So am I, said Declan. I'm going to call them sand blobs forever. I don't think that's their name. Well, I'm still going to. Chapter 8. Saltern. Saltern appeared on the afternoon of the fourth day like a small miracle. Actual buildings, actual people, the smell of something cooking, the sound of voices. It was not a large town, a single main street of pale stone buildings. Dust everywhere, salt barrels stacked in towers along the walls of the main trading house, and a population that clearly spent most of their time squinting against the desert glare. But it had a well and a market and a place where they sold hot food, and after 4 days in the volcanic sand, these things felt like a luxury beyond description. Civilization, Pip said reverently. Beautiful, beautiful civilization. They had 2 problems. They were very low on supplies, and they were nearly out of coin. The supply purse from Mara had covered Highstone in the journey to Desert's Edge, but the desert itself had consumed more food and water than expected. Options, Pip said, sitting on a low wall near the market, while Declan reviewed what was left in their money pouch. We could explain that we're heroes on a quest to rescue someone from another dimension and ask if anyone wants to fund that. No, Pip said. Agreed. That was a bad option. We could sell something. We're not selling any of the artifacts or equipment. Declan looked up across the square outside the trading house, and a crowd had gathered around something. The sound coming from them was competitive, goading sounding. People watching a contest. He stood to see better. In the open area in front of the trading house, a table had been set up, and on the table was a stack of smooth river stones. Various people were taking turns adding to the stack, seeing how high it could be built before it toppled. The current champion, a broad-shouldered man with a salt trader's build, was watching with his arms crossed and what was clearly a pile of coins in front of him. What's that? Pip asked. Rock stacking, Declan said. Pip looked at it. That's a coin bet. Yup. Can you do that? Stack rocks? Declan had spent 3 years as a ranger, learning to move without disturbing things. He set traps and shelters and camps in terrain that left no margin for imbalance. He had excellent fine motor control and very good sense of stack center of gravity. Probably, he said. I could do it, Pip offered immediately. I'm very good with my hands. You are very good with your hands, Declan said carefully. That was a diplomatic sentence. It was. You think I'd knock it over? I think there's a possibility. There's a possibility with you, too, Pip pointed out. There is, Declan agreed, but a smaller one. Pip considered this with the expression of a person measuring their pride against their pragmatism. Pragmatism won. Fine, he said, but I'm going to try it first, and then you can try if I fail. That way I still get credit for attempting. Pip attempted first, and his run lasted 11 stones before a slight overcorrection on the 12th brought everything down in a clatter that made the crowd wince. He took a theatrical bow and moved aside. Declan stepped up. The remaining stack was still 6 stones high. He added the first new stone and felt the balance immediately. There was a lean to the left, compensated for by the 3rd stone from the bottom. He adjusted the angle of the next stone to counter it, and then the next. The crowd had gone quiet in the particular way crowds go quiet when something interesting is happening. 19 stones, 20. The champion's arms had unfolded. 23, which was higher than anyone had managed today by 6 stones, and probably as high as this particular set of stones was going to go without something to brace against it. Declan stopped. The crowd made an appreciative noise, and the broad-shouldered champion clapped twice, a genuine acknowledgement, and pushed a portion of the coin pile forward. They had enough for supplies with a bit left over. Right, Pip said, walking beside Declan as they headed into the provisions market with their Wittigs. You're a ranger, expert archer, tracker, navigator through sandstorms and underground rivers. Also, apparently, a professional rock stacker. Balancing is balancing, what can I say? You are appallingly good at things. Pip picked up a dried fig from the market stall and examined it. I'm good at things, too. You are very good at things. Stealth, lockpicking, knife work, acrobatics, looking completely unfazed when extremely phased. He bought the fig and ate it. I apparently just don't have rock stacking skill set. You have skills I don't have, Declan said. Name one. You convinced a hostile harpy not to attack us purely through passion of your anti-egg stealing speech. Pip considered this. That was pretty good, he admitted. It really was. They resupplied food and water, a length of rope, salted fish wrapped in cloth, 2 small lanterns with oil that the market seller assured them would work in the desert wind. They ate a hot meal and a small plate of food on the main street, the first proper cooked food in days. Zephyr and Ember ate herring under the table and pretended to be ordinary animals, which they were not very convincing at. How far? Pip asked, looking at the scroll's coordinates. Tomorrow, Declan said. We reach the oasis tomorrow. Pip absorbed this, and he looked at his food for a moment. Are we ready? He asked. Not the joking version of the question, the real one. Declan thought about Alindra and about Morwick's description of the world where fire burned wrong and geography was inverted and nothing quite worked the way it should. About the robed figure and his purple eyes and the easy, terrible confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. I don't know, he said honestly, but we're going. Pip nodded slowly. That's probably the best answer. It's the only answer I've got. And Pip picked up his fork. Well, no point in going on an empty stomach. And he ate. Declan ate too. And under the table, Zephyr and Ember worked steadily through the remaining herring. Outside, the dead sand sat in the late afternoon heat, waiting. Chapter 9. The Oasis. They found the oasis in the late afternoon, and for a moment they both just stopped and looked. It was not what either of them had expected, though neither could have said exactly what they had expected, something perhaps more modest, more hidden, more keeping in with the general desolation of the dead sands around it. It was extraordinary. A wide circle of palms, tall, dark-barked with fronds that moved in a breeze that didn't seem to reach the surrounding desert, surrounded in a pool of clear water. The pool was large enough to swim in, perfectly round, its edges fringed with coarse grass and small flowers that had no business growing here, and were growing here anyway with great confidence. The air around it smelled of water and green things, and after 4 days of ash and sulfur, the contrast was physical. Oh, Pip said. Yeah, Declan agreed. Zephyr dropped from his shoulder and actually ran, not flew, to the edge of the pool and drank deeply. Ember landed on a palm frond overhead and sat with wings spread, apparently considering the option of a nap. Declan walked to the edge of the pool and crouched down then. The water was clear. From here, in the late afternoon light, he could see sand at the bottom, nothing else. Nothing unusual, just an oasis pool being an oasis pool, which was, given its actual nature, remarkable deception. This is it? Pip asked. This is it. It looks like an oasis. Well, it is an oasis. It's also a portal to another dimension. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Pip crouched beside him and peered at the water. I felt like there should be more visual drama, a glow or an ominous hum or something. Only in starlight, Declan said. We wait. How long? Declan checked the sky, and the sun was dropping. A few hours, maybe. Pip sat back on his heels. All right. He looked around at the oasis, the palms, the grass, the flowers, the clear pool. You know, if we survive all this, I might genuinely come back here just to sit. You said that before. I meant it before, and now I mean it. This is the best place I've been in the Dead Sands. Granted, that is a very low bar, but still. He stretched out on the grass. I'm resting until sunset. Don't let me fall asleep. Declan let him fall asleep, because Pip had been pushing hard for 4 days, and they were about to do something considerably harder than walk through a desert. He sat watch by the pool's edge, reading the rest of Morwick's journal by the fading light, and checked the scroll again. The activation phrase, the correct position for speaking it, and the precise moment to use it. The stars came out slowly. The desert night was clear, which was one generous thing about Dead Sands offered. No clouds, no haze, just the full sky opening overhead as the light faded. Stars appeared, one by one, then in clusters, then all at once, until the sky was thick with them. Not the polite, scattered stars of the coast, but an enormous pressing abundance of them. The kind of sky that reminded you the world was vast and mostly empty. Declan watched the pool, and at first, nothing. The water reflected the stars, which was beautiful, but not unusual. Then gradually and slowly, then suddenly all at once, the reflection changed. The stars in the water stopped being a reflection. They became something else. They became the stars themselves, looking up at him from below, in a sky that was not the sky above him. The water surface was gone, or rather, it was still there, but he could have touched it. But it was transparent now, genuinely transparent, a window rather than a surface, and below the glass of water was another place. Dark stone, a dim purple-gray sky going on forever, the faint, wrong patterns of stars that didn't match anything above. Pip, Declan said. Pip was awake before Declan's hand reached his shoulder, and he sat up, looked at the pool, and was very quiet for a long moment. That's it, Pip said. Yes. That's the other world. Yes. Pip stood up slowly and looked down at the pool. The scene below them, below the transparent water, was still, alien and utterly real. I have to ask, Pip said, because I feel this is worth asking. Is there any possibility that Aldrich is wrong and this leads somewhere other than an alternate dimension? Somewhere more, say, ordinary? No, I don't think so, said Declan. Yeah, I didn't think so. Pip watched the alien landscape below for another moment. Right, he looked at Declan. Scroll? Declan had it out, unrolled the correct passage. He held it under the starlight so he could read it, and the activation phrase was 12 words in a language Morwick transcribed from older accounts. He'd been rehearsing it since Highstone. He read it aloud, clearly, the way Aldrich had described, voice level, not rushed. The pool shivered. Not the water, the portal. The scene below clarified, sharpened, and became more real than real. The opening expanded slightly, and a breath of cold air rose through it, carrying the smell, cold metal, ancient stone, in a world that never had sun. Zephyr looked up at him from the pool's edge. I know, Declan told her, and she climbed onto his shoulder and pressed herself tight. Pip reached down and picked up Ember, who was watching the portal with very focused attention. Ember allowed this with unusual tolerance. They stood at the edge of the pool, and below them, through transparent water, was another world. So we're just going to jump into a magic puddle, Pip said. That's the plan. Into another dimension through a pond. Pip. Going, Pip said. He jumped. Then Declan jumped. The water didn't touch them. It was exactly like stepping through a window. Cold, a sudden weightlessness, a moment of impossible in-between, and then they landed on dark volcanic stone, and the desert was gone. The stars above them were in all the wrong places, and the air tasted of cold metal, and the sky was the color of a bruise that had been there for a long time. Behind them, the portal shivered once and was silent, not closed, but waiting, dormant, until called again. Declan looked at the compass under his shirt. He didn't need to see it, he could feel it, pointing steadily northwest. He looked up. The alien sky pressed down, enormous and permanent. Alindra, he said very quietly, to no one in particular, and then he turned and started walking. Chapter 10, The Sublunar Realm. It was the silence that hit first. Not a quiet silence, not the peaceful absence of noise. A thick, full silence, the kind that had weight. Back in Valorian, even the emptiest desert had sound. Wind, sand, moving, insects, the distant ocean if you were close enough. Here there was nothing. Their footsteps in the dark stone were the loudest thing in the world, and they seemed too loud for it, like talking in a library. They stood on a wide, flat platform of dark volcanic rock. The stone was smooth, too smooth, worn by something. There was nothing obvious that could have worn it. It had the color of old charcoal and the texture of something that had been hot once, a very long time ago. The sky, if you could call it that, was an enormous, bruised purple gray going all the way to every horizon. Not dark enough to be night, not light enough to be day. Just that one fixed twilight, persistent and total, and the stars. Declan had navigated by stars since he was old enough to be taught how. He knew the major constellations well enough to draw them from memory. These were not those stars. These were stars arranged in patterns he had never seen before, in a sky that felt too close somehow, as if the ceiling of the world was lower here. "Well," Pip said beside him. His voice sounded strange and flat in the heavy silence. "That's not right." "No." Pip turned slowly, taking in the full panorama. The flat stone platform stretched out in every direction, broken only by low ridges of the same dark rock. No trees, no plants, no features. Far to the west, or what felt like the west, something high and enormous was barely visible through the dim distance. A shadow against a sky that was too regular to be natural, too immense to be anything small. "What is that?" Pip asked. "Mountain," Declan squinted. "A very large one." "That's where we're going?" "Eventually." "Right." Pip looked at the ground under his feet, at the sky, at nothing in every direction. "Very alien, very correct in the wrong sense. I don't love it here." "We don't need to love it." I know. I'm just noting it for the record." Pip looked around again. "Also, where's the rest? Morwick talked about mist lakes, inverted geography. We're standing on a flat stone plain." "We're at the Dead Sands Oasis end," Declan said, thinking. "The oasis is a low point in Valorian. It's the desert basin. Inverted, that means." He looked at the ground and then at the low ridges around them. "We're on a mountain," he said, "or what would be one. We entered at a high point. The mist lakes should be in the lower areas." Pip looked at the low ridges more carefully. "So if we climb down from this, we'd find them." They walked to the nearest ridge and looked over. The drop on the far side was not a cliff, but a long, gradual slope, and at its base, filling the lower terrain like a slow-moving sea, was the mist. It was not like regular fog. It was slightly luminous, soft greenish-white, moving in slow currents that had nothing to do with the wind. It filled the low areas completely and drifted at its edges in long, ghostly tendrils. Pip picked up a pebble and dropped it off the edge of the ridge down toward the mist below. The pebble fell in and made no sound and didn't come back up. There was simply no way to tell what had happened to it. It just went in," Pip said. "No splash, no sound." "That's something worse. That's somehow worse." "The mist isn't dangerous," Declan said, remembering Morwick. "It's fog, dense fog. You'd lose your orientation, but it wouldn't hurt you." "The pebble disagrees." "The pebble is just lost in fog, same as if you threw it into a very thick cloud." Declan studied the mist thoroughly. "Also, I can get water from it." Pip turned. "What?" Declan had already unclipped the tide stone. He held it out towards the mist at the base of the slope. Not the deep mist, just the tendril edges drifting up toward them, and he focused. It was different here. The tide stone was accustomed to seeking liquid water, rivers, rain, underground sources. But what it was finding in the mist was water of a different form, diffused, suspended, vast, like trying to hold a single thread of cobweb versus holding a rope. He pulled gently, and the mist tendril closest to them contracted slightly, thinned, and a slow trickle of water condensed on the rocks below it and ran toward him. Not a flood or not a river, but enough actual water, clear and cold. Pip watched this happen. "That's useful," he said. "We won't run out of water, at least." "That is very useful," and he looked at the mist with a new respect. Big, glowy, slightly terrifying fog that is secretly a water source. I'm revising my opinion of it from hostile to merely strange. Declan refilled both their water skins from the condensed trickle. The process was slow, slower than finding a stream, but reliable. The mist wasn't going anywhere. They moved away from the ridge and back onto the central plateau, heading roughly west. Zephyr scouted ahead in long, gliding arcs, returning periodically with nothing to report but more stone. Amber flew small circuits overhead, in her deep red scales the most vivid color in the entire gray and purple landscape. Then Declan saw the marks on the rocks, a single symbol carved into the stone, and he stopped. It was precise, not scratched by accident, but deliberately cut, with a clean edge and consistent depth. Not large, about the size of a palm, it appeared again 10 paces further, and then again. He held up the star-weaved crown and pressed it to his temple, looking at the symbols through its clarity. Nothing. The crown could pierce illusions and reveal truths and translate ancient languages. He had used it on text in 3 different dead languages. He found nothing here, not a word, not a concept, not a fragment of meaning. The symbol was without translation, without explanation. Can you read it? Pip asked. No, crown can't get it either. That's new. Pip crouched by the nearest symbol, examining it carefully without touching it. The crown can't read something? Whatever it means, it's not from our world, Declan said, with the regularity of them. The same symbol, same spacing, a line of them leading west. Someone has been here and they marked their territory. Yeah, that's not very comforting, Pip said. No. They looked at the line of symbols stretching away across the dark stone and pointed exactly where they were going. Well, Pip said, standing up, I wasn't expecting this to be easy. It was never going to be easy. I know, I'm just saying for the record that it isn't. He shrugged on his pack higher. Lead on, then. Declan checked the compass. West. They were going the same direction as the symbols. He walked on. Chapter 11. First Contact. The encounter happened at what they estimated was mid-afternoon, though time was difficult to judge in a sky that never changed. But Zephyr had been ranging further ahead and scouting ruins, which usually meant the terrain was clear. On her third run back, she pulled up short above Declan's head and made a sound he'd never heard from her before. Not stress, not warning, but something between the two. A sound that meant attention. He stopped, held up a hand, and Pip stopped behind him. Silence. Then voices, low and distant, coming from behind a long ridge of dark rock to the north. Not close enough to hear words, close enough to know they were voices. Pip, Declan said quietly. Pip was already moving, low and fast, toward the ridge. Declan followed. They pressed flat against the stone and edged upward until they could see over. 3 figures in dark robes stood on the far side of the ridge in a loose cluster. They were looking at something on the ground, a map or instrument, from the way they were positioned. Their robes were deep gray-black, the symbols of the rocks, and their hoods up, their backs mostly to Declan and Pip. One of them wore the same symbol on his back, a large version of the carved marks they'd been following. Mages, Pip breathed, barely audible. Declan nodded. The figures carried themselves with the easy competence of people who knew where they were and belonged there. Not guards. They were too relaxed for guards. More like travelers who had made this journey before. Through the star-weaved crown pressed against his temple, he could see the truth of them. All roughly adult, all carrying significant magical power in the sublunar style, which felt different from Valorian magic. Less warm, less elemental, more like pressure. They were real and solid and not an illusion. They were also, he noticed, not currently paying attention in the right direction. He looked at Pip, and Pip looked at him. They both knew what needed to happen. They needed to not be seen. They had found evidence of organized opposition on their first day. The mages knew this territory, knew the symbols, knew the way to wherever they were going, and that meant learn without being learned and get past without confrontation. Declan pressed a hand gently over Ember's snout. Not roughly, just a light symbol. Quiet, please. And Ember, who was excellent when she understood the situation, stayed still. He pointed left, signaling a wide arc around the ridge away from the mages, and Pip nodded. They moved. Pip in front, his rogue skills making him quieter on bare stone than almost anyone had a right to be. Declan behind, the pseudo-dragons pressing tight, and the arc took them 200 yards east before they curved back west. And they moved the whole way with careful slowness that was actually faster than moving quickly and making noise. When they had the ridge firmly between them and the figures, Pip exhaled. Mages, he said, in the sublunar robes, marking stones. They're organized, Declan said. This is the villain's people, not him. A whole operation, Pip looked back then forward. How many more are there, do you think? More than those. That's my guess, too. Pip straightened up and looked at the sky. We're going to be careful about how we travel, low and quiet. Yes. They moved on west more cautiously now, using ridges for cover when available, taking the longer route when the shorter one put them against the skyline. The silence of the realm helped them in a strange way. Footsteps carried, but so did voices, and they kept hearing the mages' voices in the distance for nearly an hour before they faded. Always behind them, never closer. The marks continued west. The compass continued west. Everywhere they looked, the same flat plateau, the same dim sky, the same alien stars. The mountains in the west were closer now. Not mountains in the Valorian sense, no snow, no forest, no enormous masses of dark stone rising from the plateau. The single symbol that couldn't be translated was cut into many of them too. This whole region is claimed, Declan said. Everything we can see. Or marked, Pip said. Maybe it's not a claim. Maybe it's a warning. To who? We're the only people who've come from the outside. Maybe it's for people traveling the other way, through from here to Valorian. Pip looked at the marks thoughtfully. They've been doing this for a while, longer than Alindra's been here. These marks are old. That was true. The carvings had the weathering that meant years, not weeks. Whoever had made them had been preparing for something over a long time, and this realm was where they prepared. The thought sat in Declan's chest, heavy and cold. He looked at the compass and felt it pointing steadily west in the direction of the great mountain that was slowly growing clearer on the horizon. Tomorrow we'll be able to see it properly, he said. The mountain? Where she is. Pip looked west. The distance was still immense, and the mountain was still just a shape, but it was undeniably getting larger. Then we keep moving, Pip said. They camped where a cluster of rock formations gave them shelter on 3 sides. No fire. Ember's tail burned low and wrong here. Barely a candle's worth of light, which they had discovered the previous night. They ate cold provisions from Saltern in the dark and sat with their backs against the stone and watched the alien stars. Zephyr curled up on Declan's chest, Ember pressed against his left side. Pip was on his right, already asleep, and the silence of the realm pressed in every direction. Declan looked at the compass one last time in the thin starlight, and the needle didn't waver. She was out there, and she was alive. And every hour they sat still was an hour she was still waiting. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow. Chapter 12. The Road West. They were 3 days into the Sublunar Realm when they saw the temple. 3 days of careful travel, making slow but steady progress west. 3 days of eating cold provisions and gathering water from the mist tendrils at the low edges of the plateau. 3 days of moving around mage patrols twice more. Once, barely, the second time, easily, because Pip had developed a sharp instinct for the faint sounds that didn't belong to the silence. 3 days of mountain growing taller and taller on the western horizon. It was on the third morning when the mountain had grown from a shape to an enormous mistakable presence, its peak lost in the permanent twilight cloud, its face of dark stone shadowing the entire western sky, that Pip said very quietly, "There's something at the base." Declan was already looking at it, a shape at the foot of the mountain where it met the plateau, still too far to see clearly, and he pulled out the telescope of far-seeing, the one the Sphinx had given them on Skyfall, the brass instrument that could see great distances. He looked through it. A temple. He didn't have a better word, an enormous complex of dark stone buildings grown into the base of the mountain, like something that had been there since the mountain was made. Towers, walls, bridges between towers at different heights, all of them the same dark volcanic stone, as if everything in the realm but worked, shaped and carved and assembled with intention. And from it, bleeding through narrow windows and between the stones of its walls, came a glow gold-tinted, dim, but unmistakable. The compass trembled in his hand. He passed the telescope to Pip without saying anything, and Pip looked through it. It was quiet for a moment. "She's in there," he said. Not a question. "Yes." Pip lowered the telescope, and he looked at the temple for a while longer with his eyes, just a distant glow in the base of the mountain at this distance. But it was there. "She's been in there this whole time," he said, "since the fortress." "Yes." "Weeks," Pip said. Declan didn't answer that one. The math was something he hadn't done. He'd done it more than once. Pip turned and looked at him. His expression had that rare quality it got sometimes. All the jokes set aside, Pip underneath them, which was someone considerably more seriously, considerably more afraid, and considerably more determined than jokes usually let on. "We're going to walk up that to the enormous fortress in an alternate dimension, take her out of it," Pip said. "Yes." "The two of us and two small dragons." "Yes." "Declan." "I know." "I know you know." Pip looked at the distant glow again. "I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just acknowledging that it's a great deal to ask of a situation." "It is," Declan said. "But we didn't come this far to stop here." Pip was quiet for a moment, and then he took a breath and squared his shoulders. The physical gesture Declan had learned to recognize as Pip deciding something. "No," Pip said, "we absolutely did not," and he handed back the telescope and turned west. "How long to reach it?" 2 more days, maybe less." "Right." Pip looked back one last time at the plateau and behind them, the alien stars, the way they'd come. The Dead Sands oasis was far behind them and below them, in a world that felt very distant from this stone and twilight. Then he turned forward. "Then we should stop wasting the 2 days." They walked west. Zephyr glided ahead, circling back. Ember scouted higher and higher, her deep red scales, brighter than anything else in the realm, moving against the bruised purple sky. The compass pulled forward and the mountain rose, and behind them the plateau stretched, empty and silent in both directions, the carved symbols on the rocks watching them, waiting. Whatever waited in that temple, they were walking toward it, with eyes open and no retreat available. Declan thought of Alindra's face, her voice patient and firm. "Some things are worth the risk. You know the difference. Trust that." He did know the difference. He kept walking. That is the end of our story for the night. The story will be continued in book number 2, The Dead Sands Run. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this audiobook tonight. And please don't forget to subscribe and like. Thank you so much.